Today we're going to take a look at Lunar Shock. It's a Blue Moon clone from More Beer. So I started putting a lot more attention into my water chemistry, and I used the water profile tool on Beersmith to help me do so. The top line is the quality of the water coming directly out of the well. The left row is how much of each element I need to add. And then the bottom row is where I need to be as far as optimum for this style beer. So I keep quite a bit of each element, so I always have it on hand. And, I go ahead and get it scaled out, and then I'm going to dump it in my HLT. My HLT is going to have all the water for the entire brew heating up. So in case you don't have any brewing software or don't have any internet connection to get online to some brewing software, More Beer sends out a wonderful instruction page that has some calculations to help you get all the main stuff, how much water you're going to need, how much sparge water you're going to need, the mash temperature, really like More Beer's detailed instruction sheet. So I need to mash in at 154 degrees. Now, what I've found with my setup is I usually lose somewhere around 25 degrees, sometimes even closer to, like 28 degrees when I transfer the water from the HLT after it's been heated up over to the mash tun. So I try to go about 30 degrees more than what I'm trying to mash in at. I'd rather be a little bit warmer than a little bit cooler because I can cool it down a lot faster than I can add more hot water. The calculations say I'm going to need about 9.3 gallons total, but I'm going to lose some from the boiling and heating. So I'm going to go with about 10 gallons, and I'm going to heat up 10 gallons to about 184, and then I'll transfer, and hopefully my temps will hold good. Here's the grains that we're using. It's basically all 2-row, 11 pounds of 2-row, and then a pound of flaked oats. Flaked oats is really what gives Blue Moon or those style beers their haziness and that nice flavor. Temperature's everything here. You got to make sure you're exactly where you want to be, and that's going to be about 15 degrees warmer than your actual mash-in temperature when you're adding your grain, and that's what I try to do. I try to keep it right about that 15-degree level. I use both the thermometer on the front of the mash tun and a thermopen to make sure I get it just right. This is the first time I had some dough balls, so I must have let it in a little fast, so I got those dough balls all mashed up. First time I had any real experience with those. After I got everything mashed in, my temperature was about 5 degrees high, so I added a little water to cool things back down, and just almost instantly you can get it right where you want it. It's a little different when you go, you're mashing in too cool and you need to add hot water. I just seem to have a lot easier results when I need to bring the water down in temperature rather than going up. And so right here you can see I got within 2 degrees. I'm at 156. I need to be 154, and just by stirring it, I can bring it down to 154, put the lid on, and let her get started. About a half hour in, I'll go ahead and put my sparge device inside the mash tun, and I have it connected so that a hose comes to the top side of the mash tun. Go ahead and start recirculating. I like to let it sit for a half an hour, and then for the last 25 minutes or so, I like to recirculate it. I think the recirculating helps pull the sugars from the grain just a little more effectively. I use the pump to recirculate, but I keep the ball valve closed down quite a bit. That way I get a nice slow recirculation. And here I've got the hoses switched around in which I can transfer the first runnings into the boil kettle. And I keep the speed of that pretty slow as well, about the same speed, so I don't get a stuck mash. Now I've never experienced a stuck mash, but I've heard horror stories about them, so I'm pretty careful with that. I'm going to collect about 2 3/4 gallons of first runnings out of the 3 gallons or 3.3 gallons that More Beer told me to start with. And now I'm going to switch the hoses back up and transfer the rest of the water in the HLT over to the mash tun so I can go ahead and start my batch sparging process. So I'm going to take all the water, all the sparge water, which is about 6 gallons, pump it over to the mash tun, then I'm going to stir it up, and I'm going to let it sit for about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to let it recirculate for about 25 minutes. And then I've found that temperature is key here as well. Temperature is just a really big deal whenever you're brewing. And so I like to come in just a couple of degrees high. Since the mash tun's already warmed up, I usually only need the water to be about 10 degrees warmer as it's heating in the HLT in order to transfer it over to the mash tun. And that's what I'll lose basically, is about 10 degrees when I transfer and stir it up. And you can see I came right in 172. I was comfortable with that. After that's done, after the mash is done, I go ahead and change the hoses around, and I'm going to go ahead and start transferring the sparge into the boil kettle. And I should end up with about 6 gallons, a little over 6 actually, and that's what I came up with. It was perfect, and that's going to allow me to boil down about a gallon, and that way I'll have 5 gallons to transfer to the fermenter. So while the water's heating up, let me go ahead and show you my yeast starter. It's a yeast starter that I made with the 10-to-1 kind of ratio. So it's 10 milliliters of water to 1 gram dry malt extract. And when I can remember to do it, I love doing this because it usually makes for a much more effective fermentation. But sometimes I have troubles remembering it. You got to do it 18 to 24 hours prior to the brew. Here, as I'm getting ready to go into the boil, I always take the break very slowly. So right when it's getting ready to boil, about 210 degrees, I turn the heat down and I just kind of ease into the boil. I had one boil over and I never want to have another one. Another chance at getting a boil over is when you add hops. So the hop break, you got to be very careful, especially if your pot's this full, that you don't get a hop break that boils over. So I add my hops very slowly, at least for the first pack. After that, then they go in pretty easily. So Blue Moon clone wouldn't be Blue Moon if it didn't have some sweet orange peel. And I put the whole packet in there. I love the way that this is going to flavor the beer. The other element of a Blue Moon clone is coriander, and that's crushed coriander seed. I only use about half as much as they called for in the recipe. I'm not big on that spicy flavor, but I do want just a little bit of it. So about half the pack is what I used. Go ahead and put my wort chiller in the last 5 minutes of the boil, let it sterilize. And as we bring this boil to a close, I can start the cold water going to the wort chiller very slowly at first, and then I kind of speed it up a little bit as we go. It's time to sanitize and transfer the wort over to one of my favorite toys, the SS BrewTech fermenter. I absolutely love this thing. One of the best purchases I've made when it comes to brewing. I'm gonna go ahead and add some oxygen to the wort, and I'll run that for about 15 to 20 seconds or so, about half open. And you can see that it provides quite a bit of oxygen. This is really gonna help that yeast get rolling. And speaking of the yeast, go ahead and dump the yeast starter in. And on this beer, I'm gonna add a little bit of yeast nutrient, about a half a teaspoon or so. And that's just going to really help make sure we get a really nice fermentation. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it in a refrigerator at I'm going to start at 64 degrees and then I'll go to 68 degrees as the fermentation progresses. And I find that this fridge works perfect for that. And the Inkbird timer is, it's just a wonderful, wonderful device. And that's it for brew day. So in about a week or so, I'll put it in the keg and I'll let you know what it tastes like. Hopefully, it's going to taste like Blue Moon.